This is a very misleading percentage because 14% of the 15% are growing by transfer growth. Let that sink in. So that means only 1% are growing because they're making disciples. 1%. Did you get one of the handouts? Okay, good. You got extras? Okay, good. So that's startling. Let's go back to 1985. I heard Adrian Rogers speaking at an evangelism conference in St. Louis, Missouri. And here's what Adrian said. It's time for us to stop shuffling the Christian deck and start infiltrating the pagan pool. Wow. And I don't know if you did the math, that's 41 years ago. So Adrian was projecting that there was an issue. Let me say this. If I had one statement to make to you about revitalization and church health, start making disciples. Make disciples who make disciples. The entire time I planted in East Texas, I was always discipling 3 men. When I first went in, I went to 3 guys and I said, hey, I want to disciple you because I've got to multiply myself and I want to disciple you for about a year, but there is a commitment you need to make. Actually, a couple of things. Number 1, for us to meet. And then number 2, when we get done, you go get 3 men. Now, we already had this church plant. It literally started with about 80 people. So we already had mass. We already had numbers. It was a unique situation that I won't go into all the details. But I'm just saying, I wanted to disciple. The entire 10 years I was there, I was always discipling 3 men. Always. When I got done with those 3, and I can sit here and you know how he did the squares where we're in the middle and the homes around us. I'm not telling you I was discipling. I can give you the names. I can tell you their wives. I can tell you their kids because we built relationships. So you say, well, where does it start? Well, Chris said it well. It starts with you. Who are you discipling? Start discipling somebody. But don't disciple them just to disciple them and give them head knowledge. Disciple them with the challenge, I want you to disciple someone else. And that is what's going to lead to it. In Sam Rainer's book, Healthy, no, it's not Healthy, Church Revitalization Checklist, he makes a statement that you need to have I'm going to try to get the term right, a cautious optimism. When I saw that, I kind of went, well, that's interesting. He said, you need to be cautious because we all understand the nature of man. Man has a sin nature. But we need to be optimistic because God can change anything. He goes on to say, do you believe that Jesus Christ can save anybody? And I do. Don't you? So I also believe he can revitalize any church. If I believe he can save any individual, then he can turn any church around. Absolutely. Now, are there conditions? Of course there are conditions. There always are. So I just want you to grasp this and realize just how challenging, let me put it this way, the challenge we have before us is real. But it's got to start with us. It's just got to begin there. So who am I discipling so that they might disciple others? So let's go through these notes and on the road to health. The first blank, prescription without diagnosis. That's the word you want to fill in, diagnosis. Well, what's that called? Malpractice. Malpractice. Well, there's got to be proper diagnosis, and so that's just it's just huge. Let's go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 23. Now may the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your spirit, soul, and body be kept sound and blameless for the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. I just love this passage from the standpoint of its complete whole of who we are. Sanctify you completely in every area, body, soul, and spirit. Well, in the beginning of 1 Thessalonians, the verse that Dave uses in the multiplication workshop that I love, where it talks about faith, hope, and love, and we got those three circles. And I love the genius of those three circles and that sweet spot in the middle of we need to embrace the cross, we need to experience community, we need to engage the culture, the DNA that Neil Cole speaks about, divine truth and nurturing relationships and apostolic mission. And that where those three come together, that's the sweet spot of following through and doing and living out what God has called us to do. And then here he ends the book and he goes, now I want you sanctified completely. In other words, men, it starts with us. It begins with me and it begins with you. So let's look at a couple things here. Number one, priorities. How do you determine what is most urgent? How do you determine what is most urgent? I pastored a church, actually in Mississippi, and in our first business meeting, when we took a vote, everybody in the church turned around and looked at one man to see how he voted. And I told Shelby, this could be really good or this could be really, really bad. Fortunately, John was a godly man, and so didn't really have issues because of who he was. But that could have been quite sticky, couldn't it have? So I remember going home, I told Shelly, I said, well, I know what I got to do first. I need to have a conversation with John. I need to see where he's at. I need to find out his heart. So when you look at your ministry, what's most urgent? If you come up with 10 things you got to do, it's probably not going to go real well. So you got to take them, prioritize them, and say, okay, I'm going to start here. This is where we're going to begin. Number two, pace. How fast can you lead change? How fast can you lead change? I think I told you this, or maybe it was the other training I did this last weekend. Dave and I are kind of in a rhythm here of boom, 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 boom of several trainings, and I was raised by a military father. My dad was a drill sergeant in boot camp, so that can tell you a little bit about how I was raised. I tell people all the time, when my dad said sit down, every child in a 3-block radius sat down immediately. He just had that kind of authority. Well, in my first pastorate, Shelby comes to me and she goes, Larry, you're intimidating people. Can I tell you what I thought? And the problem? Am I getting what I want? Yeah. And I went, oh man, I didn't mean to. Because here, listen to me on this. Because when you lead that way, you'll get where you want to go, but there will be a lot of roadkill. There just will. So you got to slow down, and you got to get consensus. And John Cotter's stuff on change is excellent, of how to lead and go level by level by level. If you've never seen it, I would highly suggest you look at it. But you got to determine, hey, how fast can we make this change? Who was it that wrote the book about moving the pulpit, 1 inch at a time. He wanted to change it, and when he changed it, everybody got upset, but when he did it over stages, nobody noticed. Tom Rayner wrote a book on how to eat an elephant. Do you know how to eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's exactly right. Exactly. So you got to determine pace. Number 3, perspective. Are the church's expectations properly aligned? That's your word to fill in. Properly aligned. Now, let me say something there. They usually aren't. Your expectations and their expectations. Let me illustrate it this way. A young couple getting married, and they're looking at one another. They're in the altar, and he's looking at her going, she's going to give me everything I ever wanted, everything I ever need, make my life so happy. She's looking at him thinking the same thing. Now, let me tell you how I heard that described. What you have in that kind of relationship are 2 ticks without a dog. They're trying to pull out of the other. And you know what? You mature and you grow. Man, I'm not knocking the kind of love that Shelby and I had when we got married, but I can tell you it's a whole lot more mature now than it was then. And that's what we're talking about, because expectations, let me give you an example of expectations. In your church, older members, much older than me, at least 3 to 5 years, but anyway, 70s and above, they have an expectation of what a pastor does. They do. He's going to meet my every need, do everything I ever need. He'll visit me every single time I'm sick, in the hospital. And here I am pastoring a church of 400. Now, how am I going to do that for every single member? It's impossible. And so I told the church, I am not here to meet your every need. I'm here to make sure your needs are met. But we're going to have to do that through a team. We're going to have individuals, and so we had a deacon care ministry and other things that we did just to make sure. But that didn't change some of the people's mindsets. I'll give you an example. Miss Deanie Gray is in the hospital, and she's getting a knee replacement. Well, I was able to go by, and I told Shove, I said, Miss Deanie's right at 80 years old. I better go by. Well, I step in the room, and it was just full. She hadn't been prepped yet. And it was just full of people, family, friends. And she's going around the room. She's getting, oh, I can't believe you're here. Oh, thank you for coming. And then she points right at me, and she goes, you better have been here. That's exactly what that woman said. I said, yes, ma'am. I get it. Do you see? Unrealistic expectations, if you have them either side, you're headed for a train wreck. You just are. So, you got to make sure you're aligned. Number 4, people. What is your true capacity to move forward? Who are the people that God has given you? A lot of times we think, well, that church has this ministry, so we ought to. No, not necessarily. For example, a guy comes to Cornerstone there in Jacksonville, Texas, and he says, have you ever heard of Celebrate Recover? I said, absolutely. It's a great program. He said, would you consider having it? And I said, would you consider running it? And by the way, here's what he said. That's why I'm asking. I said, well, let's talk. And we had an awesome ministry. People are going to come to you and ask you about ministries and different things, but you're not the fix-it-all nor do-it-all, nor should you be. And so you need to think that through. What is our real capacity? And just because they've got that ministry, we're planting a church, Sandwich, Illinois, 1992. One of our best couples, one of our best families that got on board and enabled us to just see amazing salvations, baptisms, and growth. And it was because of our people in that core group. But Dan comes to me and he goes, you ever heard of Awana? Yeah. He said, what do you think about Northside having Awana? I said, Dan, are you aware of how volunteer heavy Awana is, and it is. It takes, matter of fact, most churches I know of that have Awana on Wednesday nights, they don't have an adult Bible study because all the adults are called to help with Awana. And I'm not opposed to that. I'm just saying it's volunteer heavy. And I said, Dan. He goes, yeah, I know. I said, Dan, you willing to lead it? By the way, he was our first commander and led it well and did an awesome job. But you got to think through. You can't do it all, guys, nor should you. Matter of fact, I'll say this about urgent, fast, aligned, and capacity. I think you ought to know what you can do and do it well. That's what I think. And stop comparing yourself to other ministries and other churches, because I tell you, there's something you can do most of them aren't doing. Make disciples. Be focused on that. Okay, let me give you this quote. Jesus did not minimize the storms, he maximized himself. That's the blanks you need to fill in there. Jesus did not minimize the storms, he maximized himself. I just love that. Here's a great quote from Experiencing God Day by Day by the Blackabees. If you always choose the easy way, asking for the peaceful valleys, you will never see God's power displayed to enable you to take a mountain. Seek out the mountains and you will witness God doing things through your life that can be explained only by his mighty presence. Whew, I like that. You know, what is it that can only be explained by the hand of God? What is it that you go, wow? So, here's some steps to take. Here's the next blank. First, discern it. You need to discern, okay? What do we need to be focused on? What do we need to handle? What do we need to approach? What do we need to be working on? Number two, then execute it. Old leadership adage you've heard, okay? Plan your work, then do what? Work your plan. So that's what we're talking about. Execute it. Then thirdly, keep it surrendered to God's journey. God's agenda, but that is journey as well. But I don't know why I said journey, but there you go. Okay? Keep it surrendered. God, I want this to be your direction. I want this to be you guiding. I want to know that this is the direction we need to go in, and then stand upon it. I'll give you an example of knowing who you are as a church. We had a couple visit our church, and I had forgotten something in my office. I went to get it. I come out, and our greeter said, "Hey, Pastor, we got a new couple here." I said, "Really?" Now, I didn't wear a tie. Most of my people didn't wear a tie. I mean, they were dressed to the hilt. They were. And I walked over, and he goes, "Oh, you're the pastor?" I smiled. I said, "Yes, sir." You don't wear a tie?" "No, sir." Which I thought it was pretty obvious, to be honest. But anyway. And then he goes, "Oh, y'all have drums?" He was looking at it. I said, "Yes, sir, we do." "Oh, you use the big screens with the words? You don't have hymnals?" "No, sir." I'm starting to notice this isn't going well. He goes, "Oh, no pews?" "No, sir, we went to the chairs. We did. The old pews when we got this building were so old." And he just kept bringing things up. And I finally looked at him. I said, "Can I be direct with you? Because you seem like you want to worship and you want to serve the Lord." He goes, "Yeah." I said, "You ought to try out Central Baptist Church." He goes, "What?" I said, "I know Brother Mike. Man, he preaches the gospel, but everything you've mentioned, they meet the bill." So a couple weeks later, Mike calls me. He goes, "Let me get this straight. You recommended our church to a first-time visitor?" I said, "Absolutely." He goes, "Larry, I just cannot believe you did that." And I didn't tell him I thought I was better off. I didn't go there. I just, he saw it as a compliment. Let's go with that. But can I tell you, Mike's a great guy, preaches the gospel and different. Here's what I'm trying to say. Be you. Be you. Now, that's in a spiritual context, be you. Be who Christ created you. For example, after I preach, it's not happened as much as it used to. Do you know you're loud? And I want to go, what? Really? I had no idea. No, of course I know I am. And, type thing. Go to the next. Priorities. What is the most urgent thing you need to focus on? And there's 3 blanks there. What do you need to focus on individually? What do you need to focus on as a family? And then what do you need to focus on in your ministry? The road to health starts with you individually, okay? And you got to make sure you're spiritually healthy. And then your family. What does that look like? What are things that you need to work on there? And that might be just the rhythm of having family time, of making sure you make them a priority. My middle child, Matthew, was getting recruited in football, and the school that recruited him and he ended up playing for is in Joplin, Missouri Southern State University, and Matthew's about 6'4", high school weighed about 300, and he was quite a lineman. And he calls me and he says, Dad, I got a problem. He said, Coach said I got to be there Thursday, and a parent must be with me. I said Thursday. I think it was a Tuesday, but anyway. And I said, wow, Matthew, this is quick. He said, Dad, I got to be there. I said, I understand. Let me call Mom. I call Shelby. Shelby's an RN. She goes, Larry, I can't. There's no way. You've got to. You ready? I'm preaching a revival those dates. So I called the pastor. I said, listen, I need to ask a favor. And I know where this church is. And in the BMA, it's in the Mecca. And there's got to be 100 preachers around that area in southwest Arkansas, okay? I mean, I said, is there any way you could get somebody to fill for me Tuesday night? And he said, why? I said, well, my son's getting recruited, and I need to be with him that Tuesday. And here's what he said to me. If football is more important to you than preaching the word, just don't come at all. I said, wow. Well, I understand, but let me make this clear. This isn't about football being more important. This is about my son being more important than one night of revival that 50 years from now nobody will remember. Now, for years, my son Matthew would tear up and he'd go, I just can't believe you called that pastor. I just cannot believe you did that, Dad. I said, oh yeah, I did it. It was awkward. And it really was. But you know what? There was a big part of me that was going, preaching the word of God. You better believe that's more important. Not than my son. Not one message. And if that makes me lesser in your mindset, so be it. But I made a choice. And I'll tell you, that church wouldn't have remembered, but my son has remembered that. Now, let me say something to all of you before I look better than I am. There's a lot of times I made the wrong choice in ministry. But you need to put your family first. Guys, date your wife. Date your wife. Dave was sharing with me, I never fly a red eye, but my wife asked, could we spend the day together? So I flew a red eye. You know why? They're worth it. They're absolutely worth it. Let me go back to Matthew for a minute, just tell another funny, and I got to move on. But he came to me when he was about 8 years old. He's our middle child. I never believed in the middle child syndrome till I had one. Oh gosh, he was so funny. Oh, I know. Meredith's your little girl and Benjamin's your baby. I'm just stuck in the middle. He comes to me one day and he goes, Dad, we have a problem. I said, what's that? About 8, 9 years old. He said, you always side with Mom. Whenever I'm in trouble, you always take her side. I said, well, let me explain that to you. Let me help you. He goes, yeah. I go, I like her more than you. What? You like her more than me? I said, absolutely. And by the way, I've known her longer. I knew her first, and then you came, Dad, Dad. But can I tell you something? I wanted that boy to know she comes first. Does everybody see that in your family? She comes first, and your family comes first. So anyway, and then ministry. So let's move on to the next. How fast can you move forward on that one thing? That's the word to fill in, forward. How fast can you move forward individually, family-wise, and ministry-wise? It's one thing to know what to do. It's another thing to know how fast you can do it. Now, if you think that's going to be clear all the time, it's not. It's going to be messy. And there's going to be tension. Is this too fast? Is this too slow? And sometimes you got to press forward because it's the right thing to do regardless. Okay? I want to make that clear. But you want to be mindful. You know, you want to, hey, I want us to make this journey together. I want us to do this as a team. And so I could give all the adages there, but I don't want to. Number 2, resistance to change is one of the largest hurdles in leadership. Resistance. Some people just don't like change. And before you get on them, do you? Do you like change? Yeah, sometimes that's exactly right. But there's that means sometimes you don't. Yeah, exactly. So focus on your one key change in 6 months. One key change in 6 months. It just gives you kind of a an overview, an oversight of, hey, let's not tackle too much. So think about that. What are 2 things in the next year you really need to do at your church? I don't, it may be 3. You might be able to do 3 big changes, but what are, let me give you an example. We were busting at the seams. We were out of space. And so we determined we'd go to 2 services. Okay? But I couldn't just get up and announce we're going to 2 services. We had to walk through that. We had to get everybody on board. I needed to answer questions, which meant I needed to talk to the worship leader. I needed to talk to the worship team. Well, I got to come to 2 services? Yes. Yes, you do. Well, can we leave as soon as, the worship? I said, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, hey, Neil, I need you to at least go to the piano for the invitation. Not a problem. But we just began answering questions. There's just all kinds of things to navigate there. There's even a book that I bought on how you go to 2 services because it just caused me to think through many of the aspects. Now let me give you an example of thinking you know what you're doing. So our first service was 8 a.m. Okay? And a lot of my young couples came to me and they said, Brother Larry, could we move that to 8:30? I went, well, I don't know, but why? And they looked at me and said, Brother Larry, you're an early riser, aren't you? I said, yeah. I said, we're not. Young couples are not. And I thought, and I did. I said it to one of them, Caleb Bolton. I said, Caleb Bolton, 30 minutes is not going to make that much difference. Now watch. We moved it to 8:30 and the early morning service doubled. 30 minutes. I'm like, really? You know, because it was the smaller service And so we were having about 50 to 60. We immediately jumped to 125 in the early service. And I was like, and Caleb walked up to me and he goes, so, doesn't that mean I was right? I said, yes, sir, it does. So what I'm saying is listen to people. You got to know how fast can you make those changes. Next, perspective. Are your expectations correctly aligned? Okay? Expectations. We've already talked about this a little bit, but I want to drive it home a little bit more. Congregational expectations rarely align with leadership expectations. Hey, the average church member, do you think they see commitment to Christ the way you see it? Nah. Wait a minute. I attend, I tithe, I serve. I've done my part. But now what are you wanting? You're wanting somebody that's walking with Jesus 24/7. That doesn't mean they're not aware of that, and that doesn't mean they necessarily don't want that. They've just not been taught or shown or challenged to live it. And so you got to figure that out. You got to bring those expectations to them. I remember in my first pastorate, a man stood up and said, well, I think your expectations are too great. And I said, so what are your expectations? Said, we open the doors, we pay the bills, we move on. And in front of the whole church, I said, I can't live that way. That's not me. We've got to be advancing the kingdom of God. And it was a challenging moment, and it got worse. But anyway, it didn't get better. It got worse. But he was the mover and shaker in that church, and he was being literal. As long as we have services, as long as we pay the bills, I'm good. We don't need anything else. I even talked to him privately. I said, Ed, when's the last time that baptistry was used? Well, it's there if we need it. That's what he said to me. And I said, well, we need it to be used more often. That's what we need. And so just realize people sitting out here. Matter of fact, let me tell you something about who's sitting out in your, and they're sitting side by side, which is crazy. You have the servants who are ready to serve, and you have those who are users, consumers. And they're sitting side by side. Now, that almost sounds like it's 50-50, but it ain't. It's more the 80-20 that Dave, and I think sometimes, I think we talked about the 20 might be a little generous. And I agree, because I was always looking for the coalition of the willing. Now let me say something right here on expectations. If you want people to take steps, figure out some entry-level jobs and positions. Now, some of y'all may disagree with me here, and that's okay. But there's even jobs in your church. They don't have to be saved to do the job. We had people in our parking lot that I'm not sure they had a walk with Jesus. And when I talked with them, they'd say they did, but I never saw evidence of it, type thing. I have a brother who for 50 years, when I say, Steve, I got to know, is Jesus Christ your Lord and Savior? And he'll go, well, you were there when I asked Christ to come in my heart. Yeah, Steve, but I've never seen one sign, not one sign of spiritual, desire. And, well, I'm a good person. That's what he'll always say. And then his wife will get aggravated. Well, I pray every single day. I said, Cindy, that's awesome. That's great. But I just want you to know my heart. I want to know when I get to heaven, you're going to be there. That's what I want to know. And so anyway, those kind of expectations are just there. But we had people out in the parking lot. We had some greeters. We just tried to have some positions, and that goes along with believe, belong, bless. The way we're structured, lost people really can't belong. And we just need to think that through, and what would that look like for them to belong. I got to tell you a funny. One of those guys that I still am not sure he's born again, okay? From what I've heard since I left, I'd lean that way, but that's not my call. But he's out in the parking lot, and where our church was, the homeless would walk by on Sunday mornings. And they were headed up to a soup kitchen type place in town to see if it was open. And he was walking through the parking lot, and the guy looks at him and goes, "Hey, would you like a donut?" "Where?" He said, "Right in there. You go in the gym. There's donuts, coffee, orange juice. You're welcome." And he walked in, and they said, I wasn't in there, but they said he started stuffing donuts in his pockets. But my people were awesome. Hey, my lady over hospitality said, "I'll go get you a box, and we'll put a dozen. Would you?" Then one of my men said, "Man, we'd love you." I'm not going to church. I don't need to be in church. But are these donuts here every week? And they said, "Sure are. Come back." That's what I'm talking about. So we trained our people. Hey, they're not going to look like you. By the way, he didn't smell like us either. He was homeless. And here he was coming, but my people loved him. I actually got to meet him before he left. I said, "Buddy, you're welcome here any time." He goes, "Really?" I said, "Anytime." Let me give you another example. I'm downtown, and I'm talking to a guy, and there's hardly a piece of his flesh that isn't tattooed. And I'm talking to him. I said, "Man, I'd love for you to come and go to church with us sometime at Corner." He goes, "Oh, your people wouldn't like me." I said, "Why don't you come prove me wrong?" "What?" I said, "Why don't you come and let's just see if my people." And man, I watched as he came in, and my people were all over him, loving him, talking to him, welcoming him, giving up their seat, showing him around. And he walked out as he was leaving. I was out front like we always are. He walked over and he goes, "I don't know that I'll be back, but you proved me wrong." I said, "Listen, we love you, dude. So does Jesus. I like to talk to you more about it. Maybe sometime." But that's what I'm talking about, building a culture where lost people are welcome. And I can remember one time, one of my older couples, all of a sudden, they're standing up and they're going out, and it's Luis knows them. It's Toya Altman's parents, the Turners. Dick has passed away since then, but Dick and Esther. And I walked by, I said, "Where are y'all going?" I said, "Well, there's no room. We'll go sit in the choir room." We had an overflow room with a TV. And I said, "You talk about blessing my heart." This couple, so often in our churches, we're not scooting in. We're not getting out of the way. You got to build a culture. Now, I know that's more fitting of the come and see culture, but we also need to be going and finding. I mean, I found the tattoo guy. I didn't meet him in church, nor was I probably gonna, but I met him outside. Let me speak to that for a second too. What is there in your community that you can belong to get outside your bubble? Are you doing circles of influence today? Okay. In circles of influence, when I've asked people to do that and come up with 15 names, preachers are the most challenged to come up with 15 names. Sorry if I'm stealing some of your thunder, Dave. But they are. It's just difficult. Why? I'm not getting on you. That's the world we live in. I mean, that's where we hang out with church people. So I had to figure out what's a way that I can get outside my box. So I joined the Chamber of Commerce and started going. I actually even ended up on the board, which still blows me away. They came, "Would you serve on the leadership board?" "Well, yeah." "Well, you got to be elected by the chamber." And I said, "Well, we'll see how that goes for a Baptist preacher, but I ended up being on the board. So one day I'm talking to another guy on the board named Mike Kelly. He is superintendent of Jacksonville schools. And I said, "Mike, I've heard our history books are being rewritten. And I was just curious what you've heard on that." He said, you know, Larry, I've heard the same thing. He said, but this is Texas. He said, it's not happening here yet. And I said, well, good. I'm glad to hear that. And so as we're talking, this guy walks up. His name happens to be Mike also. He is a proclaimed, not atheist. What's the other? Agnostic. And, I mean, he'll tell you real quick, I'm just not sure there is a God, you know. And he walks up and he goes, what are y'all talking about? What are y'all talking about? Well, we were talking about Mike says, we were talking about education and books. He goes, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something right now. I've got a book that thick that proves evolution. And I just don't know why people don't believe it. He looks right at me. He goes, what do you think? I said, well, I've got a book that thick that says God created the heavens and the earth. Oh, you're one of those. I said, yeah. And then he goes, what do you do? I said, well, I'm pastor at Oh, well, that explains. I said, no, that doesn't explain it. What explains it is God's Word. And we talked. Well, he and I would go back and forth, but I always tried to leave it on a positive note. Hey, Mike, I appreciate you. Anytime you want to talk. When I left Jacksonville, I saw him at a meeting, and he walks over to me. And I'm just going to say it up front. In my opinion, this is one of the greatest compliments I've ever been paid. An agnostic looks me in the eye and says, for a preacher, you're okay. To me, that's a win. Now, I don't know if any of y'all have ever seen the Ingalls scale, but the Ingalls scale says 0 is where you meet Jesus. That's where you meet the cross. Then as you're discipled, you go from a +1 all the way to a +10. On the negative, there are those who are a -10. And it goes all the way to a -1. And you're moving them along that path. There is a new study out by the Rainers on receptivity, and it does the unreceptive from 1 to 5. Okay, now the 5, they are absolutely antagonistic. Now everybody hear me. That's the smallest percentage of the American population, totally antagonistic towards the gospel. But that's who we think everybody is. You ready? The largest population of American American inhabitants are U3s, unreceptive at a 3rd level. And here's the good news. They're not pro or con. They're undecided. They're not positive or negative. Can I tell you what they are? You're not on their radar. Matter of fact, the Rainers in their study, if you'll email me, I'll send you the study that explains all 5 levels. But they said the U3s that are neutral, okay? They're more likely to move towards being receptive than unreceptive if we'll just love them and reach out to them. Huh. Wow. I think we already knew that, but now we've got data to back it up. Now, who are the U1s? The U1s are, if you'll talk to them, they're ready. They're ready. Now, we don't meet these kind of people very often, but when I was planting in Illinois, a guy met me. He had started attending because some friends invited him, Kurt and Ann Gonerman. And Kurt says, hey, we'd like to have you and Shelby and the kids over for supper. I said, okay. So we went over. We sat down in his living room. Some of y'all are going to think I'm stretching the truth, but I'm not. And I said, Kurt, how can I help you? He goes, oh, I want to be born again. I went, excuse me? I said, I want to be born again. Terry Brights, which was his good friend, he's been talking to me at work every day. I need to be saved. I said, well, we can do it. we can handle that. There are the U1s. All it's going to take is a little bit of a contact. But the largest population is U3s, but then U1s and U2s are to the left of them, and they're very, very receptive. U2s will take a little more effort, but now let me talk about U3s for just a little bit more, if I can. The U3s, it's just not on their radar. Can I tell you the generation that's raised up, they're like a generation or 2 from being church attenders. They're not the unchurched. They've never been churched. They've just never, it's not on their radar. They get up on Sunday mornings, they're not thinking about church. They're thinking about the lake, they're thinking about sports, and we now have a generation working 6 days a week. I'm not giving up my Sunday to go to church. You know, this is family time. We're going to go biking, or we're going to go whatever, and we're going to go live life. But they are neutral, guys. They just need somebody. Now, they're going to take longer than the U1s because you're going to have to build relationships because they want to know they can trust you. They want to know you're real. They want to know you're authentic. Let me give you something else here. Years ago, matter of fact, I could tell you the year, but I was 18 years old and I went to a soul winning conference. 18 years old, dumb as a box of rocks. But I still remember the man, and if I mention the name, many of y'all would recognize it. And he said this: when you're ready to seal the deal, exact verbiage, grab their hand, place your other hand over it, do not let go till they pray the prayer. And I can remember being dumb, but here's what I thought. I am not selling used cars here. This is a relationship with Jesus Christ. There's got to be. But I can tell you, the U3s, if you go in with, if you died today, do you know that you'd go to heaven? They're checking out on you. You've got to build more relationship. As a matter of fact, if I bring up you're dying, why wouldn't you think, is he about to hurt me? What does he know that I don't know? No, you've got to build more relationship and then begin having. Look for opportunities where they bring up things that are of a spiritual nature. You know, I've even asked individuals, hey, you're talking about kind of some spiritual things there. What do you think about church and Christianity? And just let them go. One of the best things you can do, everybody hear me, is stop being in the mode of telling them and start listening to them. And I learned that from that man right there. I remember when I went through coaching workshop and they had this thing on how to listen. I am not a good listener by nature. I am not. But through training, I found out I could. Here's the better thing. I found out it was kind of fun to hear their stories and listen to their stories. Let me give you another illustration here. My mom goes and sees a new doctor. My mom passed away in 2011, but she went to see one of Shelby and I's doctors. Shelby actually worked with this doctor at Saline Hospital in Benton, Arkansas, and Dr. Walsh sat down with my mom. He goes, Miss Barker, tell me about all your surgeries and all your ailments. And when he said that, I sat down. Dr. Walsh looked at me and he goes, why are you sitting down, Larry? Is it going to take that long? I said, oh, just wait. Just wait. When she got done, he looked at me and he went, wow, you were right. I said, she's been through a lot, Dr. Walsh. Well, I get the wheelchair. I take Mom back out to her car. I'm taking her home. She lived with us. And my mom said this, man, he's an awesome doctor. And I said, Mom, you don't know if he's a good doctor or a bad doctor. You don't know his skill set. Oh, he's a great doctor. I said, no. He listened to you. That's what we got to get back to. Start listening. Ask questions. Even in all those conversations. You know what I've discovered? People my age, just ask them about the grandkids and off they'll go if they have them. Oh, man. Or find out something they like. And we were talking football in Seattle, and I was actually glad the Seahawks won. But that's because nobody born again roots for the New England Patriots. I'm teasing Chris. He had on his New England Patriots socks the other day, but anyway. But I'm more an NFC guy anyway. I'm on a shuttle at an airport, and a guy's got all his Green Bay stuff on. I said, let me guess, you're a Green Bay Packer fan. And he looks at me, and you know what he says? Is there any other? And I said, good point. I said, I'm a Chicago Bear fan. He looks at me and goes, let's not talk. Because that's a huge rivalry. And then he chuckles. But I mean, just listen. Just ask good questions and think about those things. Well, I got to move on. So, congregational expectations rarely align with leadership. Number 2, our perspective versus God's perspective. How does God look at this? Well, let me tell you what I think about our church. I think a better question is, what does God think about your church? I like what I heard somebody say. What kind of letter would Paul write to your church? That's a great thing to think about. What would that letter say? And I think a couple of us are sitting here going, I just don't think I want to get that letter. I'm just not sure I do. And then, again, notice what I'm doing here. Number 3, focusing the church on one effort. One. What's the one effort that we're gonna do? I was talking to a pastor this weekend. Matter of fact, Dave, he was another one that was with Chris at the training with Heath, Ben Kingston. He's over state of Missouri, and he asked me to come and just give him an overview of the multiplication workshop. Now you think he's going fast on his stuff, which has been referenced. We went supersonic. I mean, we really did. He took about 10 minutes to 15 to introduce and show them what each one was, to then get buy-in for them to come back and all be trained, type thing. But here's what I heard Ben say. Making disciples is non-negotiable for me at Bethel Baptist Church. It's non-negotiable. We've got to make disciples. So therefore, I've got to figure out how we're going to do it. And I like what he said. He goes, I tried it before. It didn't go well, so I stopped. But now I have the mentality every time I stop, I'm going to start again. I'm going to start again. So my point there is, what Ben was saying is, okay, I haven't done this right, but I have another opportunity. I can get this going, and I can do this now. Fight the temptation. Oh, I tried that. It didn't work. Fight that temptation. Fight that. And say, no, it's biblical. It's what I should be doing. It's what I must be doing, and go after it. So, people, what is your true capacity to move forward? Number 1, pace equals speed, but people equals ability. Your greatest asset is the people you have. It's your greatest asset. And so we got to realize that. Well, I want to move on because I want to get done first of all, and then also I want to get to the next part. So number 2, you have the exact people and resources you need right now. Wow. You have the exact people and resources. Did any of y'all ever read the cartoon Kudzu? It was a comic strip, and there was a preacher on there, and he's preaching, and he says, "You are the light of the world." But there's a caption of what he's thinking, and what he's thinking is, "But God gave me a bunch of dim bulbs." Fight that temptation. God gave you the people and the resources that you need to accomplish what God wants to accomplish. Yeah, it'll take effort. Yes, it'll take work. Will there be those, as Chris mentioned, who will leave and walk away? Absolutely. So here's 3 bad dreams. 3 bad dreams. First of all, another location. Well, my location's bad. But you're where God put you. To be light. To be salt. To be who He's called you to be. Well, I'll never have the number so-and-so has. God didn't ask you to have the number so-and-so has. God asked you to be faithful. God asked you to do what He has called you to do. And boy, I wish I had more time because I'd love to talk about some of the greatest temptations that we have of comparison or of jealousy. You know, because they've got this and they've got that. Let me say something to you. Can you rejoice when someone else is blessed? Or are you going, they must be doing something wrong. They must be compromising to have that many baptisms. You know, to have those numbers they've given into the world. Where do we get that thinking? Why can't we rejoice? I actually remember, I grew up in the church growth phenomenon, if you will. Saddleback was everything back then, and we won't go there. We'll just move on. But Saddleback was everything. And I actually remember one day sitting in my office going, Larry, you'll never be a megachurch. And I'm okay with that. I remember that day. Some of my friends and I were talking, and it just dawned on me. But you know what I can be? I can be who God created me to be in my context, where He placed me, and I can be found faithful. There's a lot of things I'll never do, but I've determined by the grace of God I'm not going to quit. I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to keep on keeping on. So a bad dream is another location. Here's the second thing, another community. Another community. Dave's daughter lives in San Francisco. Can you imagine planting a church in San Francisco? What are the thoughts that we, have? They're not usually good about San Francisco. But I could name you a couple of really cool church plants in San Francisco that I've read about. And I've even met one of them, and man, what a neat couple, and what a neat ministry that they're having, and they're with NAM. They happen to be Southern Baptist, but I know of others as well. And I met him, and I said, "Man, tell me about what's that like?" He said, "Dude, you got to be ready to see and experience everything." I said, "Really?" And we were just talking about it. But you know what? They've gone in, they're loving people, and they're building relationships with people, and they're building trust. I think of New York City. Tim Keller. Oh my goodness. Wow. I remember going to Brooklyn Tab. Shelby and I were up there weekend, and she said, "So where are we going Sunday?" I said, "We ain't coming to New York without going to Brooklyn Tabernacle." And I just prayed Jim Cymbal is there, and he was, and he preached. And we walked in. Can I tell you something? One of the friendliest churches I've ever walked into. They even had sections of the building where they had people, you could tell they were responsible for talking to people. A lady in our section, she goes, "Hi there, how are you?" I said, "I'm doing well." She goes, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm from New York." She said, "No, you're not." I said, "Well, how do you know?" She goes, "That accent." I said, "It shows." She goes, "It sure does." And we just had a great time visiting. And see, we've got all these stereotypical things. And I'd always heard New Yorkers are unfriendly, cold. I didn't find that to be true, even out on the street. It just wasn't that way at all. So your community's not the problem. Did everybody hear that? I did not say your community does not have problems, but they're not the problem. Thirdly, you say, well, just another time. If it was just another time, everything would be better. Well, time is relative from the standpoint you may go through a season, but if we plant and we water, God gives the increase. Okay? We need to be faithful, plant. You are not in control of the harvest. Did everybody hear that? That's a work of the Holy Spirit of God. What you're in control of, am I spreading the seed? Am I watering the seed? Am I doing, what God has called me to do? And I want to say this, please don't get mad. But I think we've turned being a pastor into I preach. Well, we should preach. No doubt about it. Do I love to preach? Holy cow. Yeah, I do. I love to preach. But there's so much more. I'm a child of God, called by Him to follow Him and serve Him and to make disciples. And I've got to step back. Am I making disciples? Before you say, is my church making disciples? Am I? It starts individually, then family, and then ministry. So let me give you these 3 good dreams right here. Number 1, right here. Let's make a difference, man. Can I tell you what I picture when I talk about right here? I picture Colonel Travis in the movie The Alamo drawing the line in the sand. And we don't even know if that's exactly how it happened. We don't. But I like to think it did because John Wayne made the movie and I loved it, But drawing that line, hey, if you're with me, step in here. Hey, this is our lot. Let's make a difference right here. Secondly, you got it. I figure you know. Right now. Right now. Man, we don't have time to waste. Let's get started and let's go. Right here, right now. And then thirdly, I have the right people. Let me speak to this. My old leadership style was, that's where I'm going. Either go with me or get out of my way. That was a big part of my first pastorate. Well, you mature, you grow, you know, Holy Spirit of God convicts your heart. But let me tell you how I am now. If I were to go to Greg and I'd say, hey, Greg, I'd love to disciple you so you could disciple others. And Greg goes, man, preacher, I don't know. I don't know about that. Oh, really? Well, why? I just don't know that I'm ready. Okay, well, let's talk about it. And we would, and I'm cutting through a lot. But here's how I would end it. Greg, when you're ready, just say the word. I'll give you space. I'll give you time. Can I pray with you about that? And I'll be praying for you. But you know what I want? I want to keep that relationship with Him so that when the light turns on, I'm available. Does that make sense? And I believe that about church too. Does every church have people, all they do is come in, sit down, as soon as the music's over, they're out? But I want them there. Because who knows when the Holy Spirit of God will show up and the light will turn on. And they'll go, man, I'm ready. And I've had that happen. I've gone to young men like Matt Lineback. I went to Matt and I said, Matt, I'd really like to disciple you, Brandon Orr, who was the third one? Oh, Luke McCown. I said, I'd like to disciple the 3 of you together. And Matt goes, preaching my schedule, blah, 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 blah. I mean, we've all got excuses. And I said, Matt, I understand. It's okay, buddy. But I'm here. About 6 months later, he said, preacher, I can't get this off my heart. Are you still? I said, come on, man, let's do this. And now he's a deacon, and now he's discipling others. So you always want to realize, hey, I've got the right people, but they may not be there yet. That may not be where they're at the moment, but you got to give them grace and you got to love them. So number 5, people are your multipliers. People. Say you want to multiply? Well, that's on me. No, it's on you, yes, but it's on others as well. Paul to Timothy, to faithful men, and others also. Questions, thoughts, anybody? We got no time, but any questions? I was about to say we have a minute, and I looked down, it's 10:30. Yeah. I did. No. Matter of fact, Luke McCown, those that don't know, the McCowans are from Jacksonville. 2 brothers played NFL. Josh is now Minnesota Vikings quarterback coach, and Luke played 12 years. Both of them journeyman quarterbacks. But Luke will tell you, Luis, it's kind of interesting. He probably discipled me more than I discipled him. He'll tell you he had never been discipled till he got in the NFL. And it was through NFL chaplains that discipled him, and he's passionate about discipleship. Very passionate about it. Yep. But anyway, matter of fact, I communicate with Luke just about every week or so. He's got a boy that's playing college football now, Jonah, and Jonah's just kind of special to Shelby and I, watching that kid grow up in his heart for Jesus. Yeah. But anyway, that is him. I could tell some cool stories there, but anyway, I'll let it go. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I think you got about an 8-minute break or something. What time did you say we'd start back? 10:45? 10:40, 10:45. You got 8 to 13-minute break. Use it wisely. Go disciple somebody. Just saying. Thank you, Brother Greg. I appreciate it.